Nurse Alice Bennett, working at Mercy Hill Hospital, broke protocol and saved the life of veteran Thomas Granger when everyone else was dragging their feet. She was temporarily suspended for this, but the situation changed after the intervention of his brother, Colonel Granger, who achieved not only her reinstatement but also public recognition. Based on her actions, the hospital introduced a new emergency response protocol for nurses, the Clara Code, which was later extended to other medical institutions. Alice's story has become an example for the entire healthcare system of how instinct and humanity can change the rules. Welcome to my channel. It started out like any other Tuesday at Mercy Hill Medical Center, right off 8th and Lawson in the heart of Portland. The coffee was burnt, the fluorescents were flickering, and the hall smelled like antiseptic and overcooked hash browns. I'd been a nurse there for 7 years, and if you asked anyone around, they'd probably tell you I was a stickler for the rules. But they'd also tell you I never let a rule come before a patient. My name's Alice Bennett. I'm 31, and I don't rattle easy. It was just before 10 a.m. when they wheeled in a new patient, an elderly man, face drawn tight with fatigue, lips barely catching breath under the oxygen tube that looped behind his ears. His hands trembled slightly, his grip faltering on the rail of the stretcher. A well-worn military cap sat low on his brow, the emblem almost faded away. "New transfer," muttered one of the orderlies. "Thomas Granger, 79, cardiac unit." His chart said he'd had 3 incidents in the past 2 weeks. Episodes, the paper called them. I called it a ticking clock. As I walked past with a clipboard in hand, checking dosing on room 14's blood thinner regimen, I heard it. That unmistakable flatline. My ears knew it before my eyes could confirm. I turned on a dime. Granger's body jerked once, then slumped. The monitor screamed. The 2 orderlies froze like deer in headlights. There wasn't a doctor in sight, just a long hallway and the shadow of a moment that might mean life or death. I didn't think. I dropped the clipboard, plastic clattering on tile, and lunged to his side. "Code red," I shouted, which technically wasn't even the correct call for our floor, but I didn't care. "Get a crash cart." My hands moved on their own. Rail down, gloves on, elbows locked. I started compressions, counting under my breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can't think about the odds in a moment like that. You just move. Time becomes a rubber band. I don't know how long I was there, 90 seconds, 2 minutes. My arms started to burn, and sweat slid down my spine. No response. "Come on, Granger," I whispered. "Don't you dare check out on me." Then, a miracle. His chest heaved on its own. Just a little, but enough. The pulse came back, slow but there. I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath since the moment I stepped into nursing school. And that's when I heard her heels, sharp and fast down the corridor. "Miss Bennett," barked Supervisor Doreen Langley. God, her voice could peel paint. She stormed toward me like I'd lit the ward on fire. Didn't look at the patient. Didn't check the readouts. She had one target, me. "Who authorized you to intervene?" she snapped. "He was coding," I said, still catching my breath. "This isn't your floor. You're not assigned to him. I'm a registered nurse. A patient was dying. You violated protocol." I was too tired to argue. So I just stood there, silent, while she yanked my ID badge off my chest like she was plucking a tick off a dog. "You're suspended pending review. Clean out your locker." And that was it. The man behind me had a pulse. I had a problem. I glanced once more at Mr. Granger, his chest rising in slow, shallow waves. Then I turned and walked away. My shoes squeaked against the tile, the only sound in the corridor. Funny thing about hospitals. They're never really quiet, but some silences feel louder than sirens. I sat alone in the staff lounge, elbows on the plastic table, staring into a coffee I hadn't touched. The air smelled like burnt toast and lemon disinfectant. My badge was gone. My job, maybe too. The suspension notice lay beside me, crisp paper, official header. Effective immediately, it read, like I was being erased from the building, not relieved of duty. They gave me an hour before the emergency review meeting. Unauthorized medical intervention, it said in bold print. As if they wanted to make sure I never forgot those 3 words. Through the glass wall, I could see the nurses' station. People I'd worked beside for years whispered behind cupped hands. A few offered quick glances in my direction, soft, sympathetic. But most didn't meet my eyes at all. Hospital politics are a ruthless tide. It doesn't matter if you saved a life. If you swim against the current, you better be ready to drown alone. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Text from Carla Jenkins, night shift ICU nurse. "You did the right thing, Lise. but they're scared of liability. Don't expect backup. I stared at the message a long time before sliding the phone away. 6 years of spotless evaluations, no late reports, no infractions. I trained new hires, stayed late, handled families when doctors were too busy. And all of that, every bit of it, meant nothing compared to a rule I broke to save a man's life. I thought about leaving, just walking out, never coming back. But something in me wouldn't let go. Not yet. When they called me in, the meeting room was cold, sterile. A place built for decisions, not understanding. There were 5 of them at the table. Director of Nursing, Harold Chalmers. Hospital Administrator, Pamela Shore. Someone from Legal, HR. And of course, Langley. Always Langley. They didn't offer me a seat at first. Just let me stand there like a defendant in some off-brand courtroom. Miss Bennett, Chalmers began, his voice clipped and businesslike. You understand the reason you've been summoned? I nodded. You believe I acted outside my authority. You did act outside your authority, Langley snapped. Mr. Granger was not your patient. There are protocols. He was coding. The orderlies weren't trained in ACLS. There were no doctors on the floor. You're not authorized to make that call, Legal chimed in, adjusting his glasses like the paperwork was sacred scripture. The risk is substantial. If something had gone wrong. But it didn't go wrong, I said, finally sitting down without waiting for permission. He's alive. Pamela Shore leaned forward, folding her manicured hands like she was about to explain basic math to a stubborn child. This isn't about your intentions, Elise. It's about liability. About procedures. Chain of command exists for a reason. And what reason is that? I asked, quietly. To stand around while a man dies? That silenced the room. I know the rules, I continued. I follow them every day. But I also know what a flat line means. What it feels like under your palms when someone's fading. So yeah, maybe I broke protocol. But I saved a human being. Langley rolled her eyes. And you expect a medal for that? No, I said. I expect decency. And then something strange happened. I caught movement behind the tinted glass in the hall. A man, tall, sharp suit, gray at the temples, had been watching. Not someone I recognized. Not a patient's family. He stood just long enough to meet my gaze, then turned and disappeared down the corridor, already dialing his phone. No one else noticed. The panel resumed its discussion like nothing had happened. Until we review the footage, Chalmers said, your suspension stands. He slid a folder across the table toward Langley. I was dismissed without so much as a nod. Back in the locker room, I started packing my things. A faded photo from my graduation, me in scrubs, grinning ear to ear. A ceramic mug from a patient's daughter with Nurse of Hearts written in glitter paint. A little bottle of eucalyptus spray I used when the smell of antiseptic got too strong. I sat there for a minute, just staring at the open locker. You never plan on your last day. Not when you've given everything to a job that doesn't even look at you when you're done. I zipped up the duffel and was about to leave when my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This is Colonel Jason Granger. My brother is Thomas Granger. I need to speak to you. Urgently. I stared at the screen, my hand frozen in midair. Thomas Granger. The man I'd pulled back from the edge. And his brother was a colonel. At precisely 11 a.m., you could hear the sound of polished dress shoes striking linoleum from a hallway away. The kind of deliberate rhythm that makes you sit up straighter without knowing why. I was in the middle of turning in my locker key when the front desk receptionist went pale. I looked up just in time to see him. Colonel Jason Granger. He stood tall in full military dress uniform, silver trim, rows of commendations on his chest, and a sealed government envelope in one hand. He looked like someone who walked out of a history book and directly into this hospital to settle something that had been unsettled too long. Excuse me, he said to the receptionist. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the space like thunder in a canyon. I need to speak to your hospital director. It concerns a matter of national significance. And a nurse named Alice Bennett. The poor receptionist stammered out something about protocol and appointments. Granger didn't flinch. He simply held out the envelope with the official crest glinting under the lights. Make the call, he said. Less than 10 minutes later, I was back in the same meeting room, but this time the chairs were shuffled, and the energy was electric. Everyone had been summoned, the director herself, Chalmers, the legal team. Even Langley sat stiff-backed, her lips thinner than I'd ever seen. And at the head of the table now sat Colonel Granger. I walked in, and the whole room shifted. Not out of respect for me, but for him. He didn't rise. Didn't need to. Just gave me a nod and gestured toward the seat beside him. Miss Bennett, he said, his voice a calm river over stone. Thank you for joining us. No one spoke for a moment. Then he opened the envelope. This is Staff Sergeant Thomas Granger, he said, laying down a photo of a young soldier in fatigues, grinning under a jungle canopy. 3 tours. 2 Purple Hearts. One man who has never, ever asked for anything until now. He opened a small wooden case. Inside was a medal, not hospital-issued, not even local service. A deep violet heart cradled in velvet, shining like something forged under pressure. My brother is alive today because of Nurse Bennett, he said. That's not opinion. That's fact. And before anyone here tries to remind me of policies or liability risks, let me remind you of something else. Courage has never once waited for permission. Langley fidgeted. Colonel, with all due respect. Respect is earned, Ms. Langley, he interrupted without raising his voice. And Alice earned more of it in 2 minutes on that hospital floor than most do in a lifetime of paperwork. The director tried to steer things back to neutral. We appreciate the context, Colonel, but there are procedures to follow. Then change your procedures, he said flatly, pulling a USB from his inner pocket. I've reviewed the footage. This shows Alice Bennett initiating textbook CPR while others hesitated. You may play it for the record. They did. The entire room fell quiet as the screen flickered to life. There I was, dropping the clipboard. No hesitation. No checking charts. Just movement, efficient, precise. When it ended, you could hear a pin drop. In the military, the colonel said, we have a saying, initiative in the absence of orders. You act, because waiting costs lives. Alice Bennett acted. He turned to me then, not with pity, but with something else. Something deep and rooted. You didn't know who my brother was. Didn't need to. That's what makes this matter. You didn't save a soldier. You saved a person. The director finally cleared her throat. In light of this additional information, I believe we need to reevaluate Nurse Bennett's suspension. But Granger wasn't done. No, that's not enough. This isn't about lifting punishment. It's about acknowledging valor. He turned to the rest of them, sweeping them in a single, powerful glance. This woman deserves more than reinstatement. She deserves recognition. And your policies? They need to reflect the kind of world where people like her can save lives without fear of being punished for it. Langley said nothing. The colonel stood, closing the metal box with reverent care. I don't come here as a brother, he said. I come here as a man who's seen real courage. And it didn't wear stars or stripes. It were scrubs. He looked at me once more. You don't owe anyone in this room an apology, he said. But they owe you their gratitude. And with that, he left, his footsteps as steady on the way out as they'd been on the way in. I sat there, still and stunned, while the hospital director announced my immediate reinstatement. There was talk of internal reviews, of new emergency protocols, of changes that would ripple outward. But all I could hear, echoing through the concrete silence of that room, was what he'd said. Initiative in the absence of orders. By the time I stepped back into the locker room, my hands were still shaking, not from fear, not from relief, but something in between. A strange kind of awe. Like I just watched my life get plucked off a cliff edge by a man who'd never met me until an hour ago. Colonel Granger. I didn't even know his brother's name until that day. But now? Now I couldn't stop seeing his face, drawn and gray, gasping for life as I knelt over him. Funny, isn't it? How a moment you don't plan for can become the reason everything else changes. I clipped my ID badge back on. They'd already reactivated it. My name and title blinked back at me from the screen. Bennett, Alice RN, trauma response. As if nothing had ever happened. Except everything had. When I stepped into the ICU later that afternoon to check on Mr. Granger, I didn't expect him to be awake. But he was. His eyes fluttered open slowly, scanning the ceiling like he didn't quite know what world he'd returned to. Then he looked at me. You the one. He rasped, voice graveled with age and intubation. I smiled gently. Depends what you mean by that. He tried to grin, but it came out more like a twitch. The one who yanked me back. I just did my job, Mr. Granger. No, he said, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. You did more than that. My brother told me. Colonel Granger. He said you didn't wait. There was something in his eyes, not gratitude exactly. Reverence, maybe. As if he understood just how close he'd come to the other side. And who'd stood in the way. I carried men through jungles, he said. Fought to keep them breathing when I was bleeding myself. Never thought someday someone would do that for me. I squeezed his hand. That's the deal, isn't it? We look out for each other. He nodded. Then he closed his eyes again. And just like that, the curtain of stillness returned. The kind of quiet only an ICU knows. Monitors humming. IVs dripping. Machines breathing on behalf of the weary. Later that evening, I was charting vitals when I spotted someone unusual near the nurse's station. Supervisor Langley. She didn't bark. She didn't glare. She stood waiting. She nodded at me. Nurse Bennett. May I have a word? My jaw tightened a little, but I nodded. She cleared her throat, glancing toward the break room, where a few nurses were finishing up shift notes. May I speak in front of them? I blinked. You sure? She gave a stiff nod. Yes. We stepped into the main corridor. Langley turned to face the gathered staff. Her voice came softer than I'd ever heard it, almost uncertain. I want to acknowledge something important. Every eye turned toward her. Even the vending machine stopped humming, I swear. 3 days ago, Nurse Bennett made a decision that saved a man's life. I responded by suspending her, by following a rule rather than honoring an instinct. She swallowed, and for the first time in all my years there, I saw it, the flicker of doubt beneath her polished armor. I was wrong, she said, and I'm sorry. Dead silence. Then footsteps. She walked over to the bulletin board beside the charting station and pinned up a new sheet of paper. Effective immediately, she announced, Mercy Hill will be adopting a revised emergency response policy. She turned back to the group. We're calling it the Bennett Protocol, also known as the Clara Code. There were confused glances. A few chuckles. Langley smiled faintly. When no physician is immediately available and a licensed nurse deems a situation critical to life support, that nurse is empowered to act. Fully. Without delay. Without fear of disciplinary action. One by one, the nurses stood. Then the clapping started. Soft at first. Then steady. Then loud. I felt my face flush. Not the shy kind. The deep, full-hearted kind. Like something heavy had been lifted and replaced with light. Langley stepped back, nodded to me again. This time with something like genuine respect, and walked away. And just when I thought the day couldn't hold more, I heard someone behind me clear his throat. Bennett. I turned. Dr. Jared Morris, Chief of Medicine. The same guy who once told me I took my oath too seriously. The director would like to see you, he said. I blinked. Now. He nodded. Now. I walked into the director's office and nearly stepped out again. Seated in the room, alongside the hospital director, were Colonel Granger and someone else I hadn't expected, Thomas's brother, James. We've been reviewing our emergency protocol policies, the director said, and we've come to a realization. She slid a thick folder toward me. Our system works for paperwork, not for patients. She took a breath. Alice, we'd like you to lead a committee. One tasked with reshaping how this hospital defines urgency. And who gets to answer it? I stared down at the folder. Me. A nurse who just 3 days ago had been suspended for doing her job. You're the right person, the director added. Not because you're loud, but because you're clear. Colonel Granger nodded, offering a rare smile. Time to rewrite the rules. When I left that office, badge clipped firm to my chest, folder in hand, I passed the ICU window one last time. Mr. Granger was laughing. Actually laughing, with his brother, both of them leaning back in their chairs like they'd just won the lottery. And in a way, maybe they had. I thought about what it meant to save someone. Not just the man on the table, but all the ones who'd come after him. People I'd never meet. Moments I'd never see. And somehow, I felt whole again. Not just reinstated. Restored. The next morning, the hospital felt different. You wouldn't have seen it on the bulletin board or heard it in the overhead announcements. But it was there, in the nods from staff who used to keep their heads down, the subtle hush that fell over a hallway when I walked through, the way people stepped just slightly aside like I had a badge that meant more than just RN. Respect. Not the loud kind. The earned kind. It had been only a day since Langley pinned the Clara Code on the wall, and already the whispers had shifted. I was no longer the nurse who broke protocol. I was the nurse who'd changed it. I didn't seek out attention, but it found me anyway. A family in the waiting room asked for me by name. A junior nurse shadowed me through rounds like I was Florence Nightingale. Even Dr. Morris, once as distant as a tax form, gave me a rare nod during morning briefing. And yet, the most profound moment of that shift came in the break room, where, just after my lunch had gone cold while I was checking on a post-op bleed, Langley walked in. Not Supervisor Langley. Doreen. She looked different. No clipboard. No folder. No scowl. She held 2 paper cups of coffee. She set one in front of me without a word and sat across the table. We just sat like that for a minute. Me with my ruined sandwich, her with that stiff, forced posture of someone trying not to let vulnerability show. I used to be like you, she finally said. I raised an eyebrow. Rule breaker. She smiled faintly. Fire starter. Before administration got a hold of me. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She stared into her cup like it held memories instead of coffee. There was a patient back in '04. Congenital heart defect. Paged the surgeon 3 times, no answer. Finally, I intubated and started CPR myself. Saved him. Parents sent me flowers. She paused. They also sued the hospital. Said their kid shouldn't have been in that position to begin with. Legal blamed me for not waiting. I wasn't suspended. But they buried me. Never promoted me again. I felt my chest tighten. She looked up at me. When I punished you, it wasn't about you. It was about me. About fear. For a moment, she looked almost human. I'm sorry I took that out on you. And I'm glad you didn't listen to people like me. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. Thank you, I whispered. She stood to leave. I'll never stop fighting for order, Elise. That's just who I am. But I'll fight a little harder now to make sure order makes room for instinct. And with that, she was gone. That night, I finally went home. Home wasn't much, a 3rd-floor walk-up with peeling paint and a stubborn hallway radiator. But it had a window that looked out over the city skyline and a sagging couch I called mine. I curled up with a throw blanket and replayed the last 72 hours like a movie I couldn't believe I'd starred in. Suspended, defended, redeemed. Somewhere between the second cup of tea and the dog-eared novel on my lap, I heard my phone buzz. A message. Unknown number. Evening, Nurse Bennett. This is Jason Granger. Just checking in. Thomas says he's feeling stronger. He called you a walking defibrillator. I don't think that's a medical term, but he meant it fondly. I laughed out loud. Then another message came in. Colonel Granger, if you're ever ready to lead something bigger, beyond this hospital, let me know. We need people like you rewriting more than just hallway policies. I didn't reply. Not yet. But I didn't delete it either. The following morning, a letter arrived at the nurse's station. It was hand-delivered. Cream envelope, heavy paper. Addressed to me. Inside was a simple card, and a note written in shaky but determined script. You don't know me, but my father was in room 209 when you saved that man's life. He saw everything. He said it gave him hope to fight his own battle. Thank you for being the reason he didn't give up that night. Natalie H., daughter of Patrick H., stage 4 lymphoma. I stood still with the card pressed to my chest. Sometimes you work your whole life and never know if it mattered. And then something like that lands in your hands, and suddenly, it all does. I spent the rest of the week walking the floor like I always had, but something had shifted. When people said my name, it wasn't in hushed tones anymore. When junior nurses had questions, they came to me first. Even the ER techs, gruff and impatient, paused to ask, Hey, Bennett, you think this'll hold, or should we get ortho? It wasn't just my title that had changed. It was what people thought of when they heard it. By Friday morning, the new protocol, the Clara Code, as everyone had started calling it, was officially printed and laminated outside the ER, ICU, and cardiology wings. 3 pages, bold red header, and at the top. Authorized nurse-initiated emergency response. Created, June 4th. Lead author, Alice Bennett, RN. I didn't ask for it. Would have preferred they leave my name off, honestly. But some things aren't about comfort, they're about legacy. At 9:05 a.m., I walked into the ICU to start rounds. In the moment I passed room 312, everything stopped. A young nurse, Jay, was performing compressions on a man mid-transport. No doctor in sight. No senior staff. Just her and a heart monitor flatlining. I rushed forward, but I didn't need to. She was calm. Steady. Counting under her breath. A respiratory tech was already grabbing the AMBA bag. Nobody hesitated. Nobody waited for permission. When the crash team arrived, the rhythm was already returning. The patient's vitals were faint, but present. Later, as Jay stood washing her hands, I approached her. She looked up, her face pale and damp with sweat. I just remembered what you did, she said quietly. Didn't want to wait. You didn't, I replied. You led. We didn't hug. Didn't cry. Just nodded. Like soldiers passing in the night. And that's when it hit me. The thing I'd fought for wasn't about me at all. It was about this, about making sure no one ever felt alone again in that terrible, necessary moment between heartbeats. That evening, I got another message from Colonel Granger. News of the Clara Code reached the base today. We're sharing it with our med teams. You've done more than fix a rule. You've reminded people why they signed up. Also, Thomas wanted me to send you this. Attached was a photo. Thomas Granger, sitting up in bed, smiling faintly with a tiny whiteboard in his lap. Written in shaky marker. Tell Nurse Bennett I'm not dead. But damn, I felt close. I laughed so hard I startled a med student outside the lounge. Sometimes change starts with a mistake. A risk. A heartbeat skipped on a quiet Tuesday. And sometimes that risk saves more lives than 1,000 perfect charts. I didn't mean to start a revolution. But I'm not sorry it happened. It was just past shift change when I got called to the director's office again. No warning. Just a message on the board. Director Shore requests RN Bennett's presence. ASAP. I figured it was follow-up. Maybe paperwork. Maybe a gentle nudge to stop making waves. Instead, when I walked in, 3 people were already seated. Colonel Granger, Director Shore, and someone I didn't recognize, an older woman, white hair tied back, clipboard on her lap, calm and observant. This, the director said, is Dr. Simone Harrell, National Board of Nursing Oversight. My pulse skipped. We're here, Dr. Harrell said with a small smile, because what started as a disciplinary review became a case study. Hospitals across 3 states have already requested copies of your emergency response draft. I blinked. Excuse me. Colonel Granger stepped in. You changed something big, Bennett. And people are watching. Not to punish. To learn. Dr. Harrell nodded. The question is, do you want to be part of that? I sat slowly. What does that mean? We want you to help design a national emergency intervention protocol for nursing networks, she said. Training. Guidance. Field logic. We need someone who's lived it. I didn't have an answer. My brain was still back on national protocol. I'm a floor nurse, I said honestly. I chart vitals and chase IVs and yell at interns who try to change dressings with gloves from their pocket. Exactly, she replied. You understand where the pulse of care actually lives. Colonel Granger looked proud, but not in a loud way. Just like he knew this was always coming. We'll give you time, the director said. It's a big decision. It was. And it would get bigger. But in that room, all I could think about was how I almost lost this job 3 days ago for doing exactly what they now wanted to teach others to do. And how fast the world turns when you don't back down. Back on the floor, everything looked the same. Fluorescent lights, beeping monitors, carts half-stocked, phones ringing off hook. But the energy was different. People looked at me differently. Like I wasn't just another pair of scrubs. Like I was a compass. I never meant to be an example. But by Monday, Mercy Hill was fielding calls from 5 hospitals asking if someone could speak to the nurse who started the Clara Code. One was a trauma center in Cleveland. One was a rural clinic in Wyoming. One was a VA hospital in Tampa. Turns out, a nurse acting without permission had saved a life in every single one of them. And each time, that nurse was facing disciplinary action. Until someone forwarded them my story. It wasn't going viral or trending, but it was traveling, quietly. Like a current underground. The next shift felt like walking through a new hospital in the same building. A paramedic stopped me in the stairwell. Big guy, hands rough from field work. You Bennett? He asked, like he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Yeah. I read your file. The colonel sent it over. He paused, then added, You saved someone who looks like my old CO. Just wanted to say thanks. Then he was gone. That afternoon, I passed room 209 again, the one near where Thomas had crashed. Inside was a man named Patrick, stage for lymphoma. His daughter, Natalie, was adjusting his blanket. I tapped gently. How's he doing today? She smiled. Stronger. Better. He keeps talking about the nurse who ran like lightning. I laughed. That's generous. I tripped over a supply cart on my way there. Still lightning, she said. When I got back to the nurse's station, someone had added a sticky note to the bulletin board next to the Clara Code printout. Sometimes saving a life means stepping out of line. Thanks for stepping first. Jay? I didn't recognize the handwriting. But I didn't need to. It wasn't about recognition anymore. It was about the ripple. And knowing that somewhere, maybe in a hallway just like this one, another nurse would see that code, take a breath, and know. They were allowed to move. Late Tuesday afternoon, I walked past the same hallway where it all began. That stretch of tile was just linoleum and scuff marks to most people. To me, it was the place where I stopped being afraid of rules and remembered why I got into this work in the first place. Across the way, room 306, the room where Thomas Granger had flatlined, was empty now. Fresh linens. New chart waiting. I stood there for a moment. Not long. Just enough. Nurse Jenkins passed me on her way to imaging. "They're calling that hallway the Granger line," she said with a smile. I chuckled. "Please tell me they're not putting up a plaque." "Not yet," she winked, "but there's talk." In the lounge, Dr. Morris found me. He looked tired. But there was something else in his eyes I hadn't seen in years: humility. "Do you know how many nurses have cited the Clara Code in the last 72 hours? He asked, arms crossed. "No." 17. That we know of. 3 in our own ER. "It's working, Alice." I nodded. "You've done something rare here," he added. "You didn't just save a patient. You saved a piece of the system from itself." It was probably the nicest thing he'd ever said to anyone. That evening, I caught sight of Thomas and Colonel Granger in the lobby. Thomas was in a wheelchair now, dressed, discharged. He looked stronger. A bit of color in his cheeks. Colonel Granger saw me first. He stood and offered a hand. "This one," he said, patting his brother's shoulder, "won't stop talking about you. Says you've got hands like a mechanic and a conscience like a chaplain." I grinned. He must still be on meds. Thomas laughed, a warm, full sound. "Nope, that's just truth." Then he grew quiet. Looked at me directly. "Thank you," he said, "for not waiting." I didn't say anything at first. Because truthfully, I'd almost waited. I'd almost hesitated. But I didn't. And that made all the difference. A few weeks later, I found myself standing behind a podium I never asked for. It was a small conference, mostly clinical leads and training supervisors, but the keynote speaker hadn't shown, and someone had read about the Clara Code in a nursing journal and asked if I'd fill the slot. I almost said no. But then I thought about room 306. About the frozen faces of the orderlies. About Thomas Granger's chest still beneath my hands. About every nurse who'd reached out since, quiet, tired, brave. So I said yes. The room was full. Not huge, but full. I didn't give a speech. I just told a story. About a Tuesday morning. About how silence can be louder than alarms. About how we build systems to keep people safe, but sometimes we forget why we built them at all. I talked about the weight of rules. And the greater weight of inaction. I ended with this. There are people trained to save lives. But not all of them are allowed to act when it matters. The Clara Code doesn't change everything. It just opens the door for someone to step through. Back at Mercy Hill, things didn't get perfect overnight. We still ran short on gloves, still lost patients we fought for, still filed reports until our eyes crossed. But something had changed. Fear wasn't in the air anymore. Not the same way. When a code red was called, no one asked who was assigned. They just moved. Last week, a new nurse named Renee asked to shadow me. Bright-eyed. Quick learner. A little shaky with the vitals tablet, but steady with her hands. She asked me, halfway through shift, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't acted?" I paused, looked around the floor at the quiet hum of the place I still called home. "I think about it all the time," I said. But only to remind myself what did happen because I did. She nodded slowly, like she understood. That night, I passed by the board again. A new sticky note was up. Courage isn't the absence of rules. It's the choice to rise above them when someone's life is in your hands. No name. Just a signature. EB. Guess someone was quoting me now. I peeled it down. Smiled. Put it in my locker. Not as a trophy, but a reminder. The hallway is still just a hallway. The code is still just paper. But behind every heartbeat that's saved because a nurse didn't wait, there's something more. Something permanent. A pulse that was nearly lost. And the hands that refused to let go.